First of all, can I say the title is very tongue-in-cheek. I'll come back to it. It's a pet hate of mine, this phrase, doing the maths. Really winds me up. I should also say a little bit of acknowledgement and a bit of personal history of where I came to from this, which was part of my thinking was influenced by working with the More Maths Grads project with a couple of my colleagues who are listed there. The other bit of personal history really for me is that when I first started in my current job, I didn't ever see our first years. I first met them in the second year, and they do all these things when they're in their written work that I thought indicated an element of not, well, of being a bad mathematician really, of not seeming to grasp what maths was about. And I naively thought that that was because it wasn't being drilled into them in the right kind of way in the first year. And then I got my, careful what you wish for, I got my first year module then, round about the time we started the More Maths Grads project. So I thought here was my chance to try and do something about it. And in fact, a lot of the things that wound me up were not directly about writing maths. Those were kind of a snapshot of the ones I thought of yesterday when I was writing my slides. So, you know, we've talked about, we all say maths is about being logical and being precise and being accurate, and I think it was Kevin said we don't always necessarily, just learning some maths is not the same as learning those processes actually. But you know, they had really muddled thinking about the process. Back to what, in a way, what Franco was saying about concepts and processes. They could sometimes do the technique, but it seemed to me they had no understanding of why it worked and when it didn't work, and what the ifs and buts were. And it seems to me, I didn't want to labour this because I knew I was on third, that a lot of those are connected with how you write, and they feed off each other, particularly the kind of thinking clearly about a process that you're doing is linked to being able to write it properly, and being able to write it properly is linked to thinking clearly about it. I would actually also include getting sensible feedback from your tutor is often related to having written something sensible in the first place, in that I can give them more sensible feedback if they've actually said what was going on in their brain at the time, rather than me looking at what they've written and trying to guess what was going on in their brain. So I kind of started thinking about my first year module and thinking, what could I do? And it seemed a good vehicle in that we had this first year module that was originally conceived as, well, kind of a lot of revision and a bit of extension. We took at that time students with quite low A-level grades, and we took a lot of mature students who hadn't done any maths for 20 years. And so this module included things like getting them back into the idea that they should be doing algebra and knowing some calculus, but then some extensions. And there were all sorts of problems with it, including the fact that they didn't think conceptually. The brighter ones often were the ones who ended up failing my module, because they looked at it at the start and went, oh, that's all revision, and then switched off. So there were all kind of things going on there. But because it had a lot of revision anyway, it seemed like a good one to try and get them to do that stuff in a different way. Meanwhile, as I say, I was involved in the More Maths Grads project, and we got to interview lots of staff in different places, one of whom was Kevin, who influenced the way I was thinking on this as well. Lots of what he said chimed bells. But in a way, he said the curse of the implication symbol. I had an even more basic problem, which was summed up by a quote from a colleague in another university, when we were asking what was wrong with math students or something like that. And she said, what really annoys me is that they use equal signs with gay abandon. And it seems to me that kind of goes to the heart of three problems. The first is, it's really basic. The problems they have with what they write down is really basic. If you've got to undergraduate level and you don't know when you can, and more importantly when you can't, use an equal sign, then that's fundamental. The second one is that misuse of that really shows up the link between sloppy thinking and sloppy writing. To me, it's like it illustrates that real connection between if you think badly, you'll write badly, and if you write badly, you'll think badly. But actually, the other thing it points out is the notion of what really annoys me. And when this person said this, actually I didn't interview this person, but I saw the transcript and I read that and I kind of thought, yeah, it really annoys me too. And I actually think, you know, that this prompted a kind of rethink for me in that it does annoy me, but it shouldn't. Why do I say it shouldn't? Well, you know, when they come in, they can't do dynamical systems, which is what I teach mainly in the second year. But that doesn't annoy me that they don't know that stuff. I just think, oh, that's my job. I teach that stuff. And if the truth is that they don't know this stuff, then it's my job to teach it them. We talked about whether we can change the national curriculum or what goes on in schools and the problems with league tables and what that does to school teaching. I really have almost no influence on that. I can stand there as a maths lecturer going, I think those league tables are really damaging maths education, but nobody's going to listen. I can change what's in my course, not what happens before. So I set about trying to come up with a fresh approach to this module, starting with changing my own attitude and saying, it is my job to teach this stuff. Stop getting angry about it. Stop feeling frustrated that I'm dealing with things that 20 years ago when I was a maths undergraduate we would have considered far too basic to be in a maths degree. That's, you know, just live with it, get over it, deal with it. And I rewrote the way I presented my module to have this very explicit emphasis on what I've called core mathematical skills. Actually, I mean more than skills. I mean skills and attitudes and ways of thinking and all those kind of things, part of which is how to write. And I decided, having had 1 year where I tried this 1 year where I kind of talked a lot about this at the start and then expected them to do it, and I realized it just didn't work. It was too much. It was too much all at once. They didn't have these skills. I had to get real about the fact that I'd developed those skills somehow or other, a bit as Franco described earlier, from age 11 with a combination of foreign languages and grammar and a different A-level syllabus and a different O-level syllabus and a different set of teachers who weren't worrying about league tables. So I'd had 7 years of it before I got to university. If our students haven't had it, expecting them to pick it all up in the first 2 weeks is silly. So I went with a really gradual development of the ideas, alongside with trying to explain to them why it was important, not just saying this is the rule, but pointing out why. And I'll show you quite how basic I mean in a little while. And I tried to get that emphasis reflected in every aspect of what the course included. So what I said at the start, if I gave them a program of this is the syllabus, what was written on the syllabus, what the handout said, what I did in my lectures. And actually what I want to do now is kind of have a look at what I mean by saying this was reflected in all this, and then come back to the gradual development. So, you know, the introduction to the module, we give all our students, for every module, they get a kind of couple of sheets that says this is what this module is. And the opening line of mine says, the aims of this unit are for you to develop the skills to read, think, work and write as a professional mathematician. There is some more, that's not the only aim, but that's the opening gambit of what I say. And I also give my students handouts to go alongside the lecture notes. And the first one starts with, writing your maths well is important because. Not, here is some maths to do, here is something new for you to think about that emphasises what it's about. At which point, I actually want a slight diversion, because writing your maths well is important because of what? We've already mentioned some of it, and I tell them the first one I tell them is because if you write it well, you'll make fewer mistakes. That it's not just that, you know, the students who lose a minus sign becomes a plus sign, or they lose some bit of some term as they turn the page, they're the ones who are writing messily, by and large. So I sell it to them to start with as saying, you'll get the sum right more often if you write it properly. I talk to them about saying that you need to be thinking logically about what you're doing, and if you can do that, you can write it well, and if you write well, if you're trying to write well, it forces you to do that. And I talk about that kind of more philosophical aspect of what is maths, what makes us different from other disciplines. So that's my starting point, and then I kind of add in the other stuff. That yes, you've got to be able to communicate, and that's a good life skill, whatever you're going to do after your maths degree. And I talk about it being their responsibility to communicate clearly, not the readers. And I do even throw in the fact that, you know, think about the fact that when you're getting your marks, the person doing it has got 90 scripts to fly through, and if you put a smile on their face while they're doing it, you might get a higher mark. But I focus on that top one, and it forced me into thinking that if those are the reasons I really think writing maths is important, it kind of raises a question to me about what is it about the writing maths that we want them to do? Because I'm not focused here just on the work they're going to hand in to me, or the report they're going to write for their final year project. What I'm trying to get them to do is change the way they write all of their maths, so that the maths they write for themselves, their private working, is written well enough that it's still logical and flows and makes sense, and if they look at it in 6 weeks' time when they're revising for their exam, they still make some sense of it. So I'm not focused on assignments and exams particularly, and that raises a question about how much you expect them. What we said, this question that's disappeared down here, do we all agree what good mathematical writing is? I got a bit, I mean, I think it's a big question. Do we expect the same standard in the work you do privately, in an exam script? Do we even expect the same standard if we ask them a question, find the solution of this equation? Seems to me that you can produce a reasonably good answer to that with very few words that's rather different from write a report on. Do we want sentences? Well, I want it kind of in sentences, but actually, you know, in their private work, I think sub-equation 1 into equation 2 is an abbreviation, is kind of okay. Whereas I think if I take a dogmatic line and say, you must always write substituting equation 1 into equation 2, which gives in full, they're never going to do that in their private work. I don't do that in my private work. So I'm more interested in a way in getting them to think about how they write everything and saying, if this is what you write when you're on your private stuff, then let's expand it in when you're giving it to somebody else. But I think it's a tricky one, because we can all agree that that's nonsense. That was a kind of different one where all the essential bits are kind of there, but it's dreadful to try and read. But the two kind of, if I think about two standards, this to me, apart from a lack of full stops, seems reasonably okay as an explanation of what's going on. And you may or may not agree, and I think it would depend what work they were doing. I think if you ask, in any other circumstances, if you say, what are writing skills? One of your questions is, what's the audience? Who's going to read it? So I might want some things like that, and I might want some things with proper sentences between things, and I'm not talking about the fact that this is typed, but just about the fact that there is a kind of fuller sentence than that kind of stuff. So because I'm I'm most interested, I do want them to end up being able to write like that and recognise that that's easier to read. But I also want them to do something different in their private stuff, and that kind of comes back to my question of who is it for? So I did want that slight diversion. It was a diversion. I was really wanting to talk about saying I tried to redesign this course and reflect all of that in everything. So back to that, my old syllabus would be a list of kind of mathematical things, starting with those things that are very clearly revision. Most of our students don't have further maths, so the stuff at the bottom here is new to them. And so that's what my syllabus used to say, and what my syllabus now says is a whole load of stuff about what things you might need to consider. I'm not on just writing maths here. I am trying to get them to think about what they're doing and understand the concepts a bit more and be more logical. So a lot of it is about writing maths, but you'll see I've thrown in there the importance of checking your own answers. I pull a line with students of saying, you should never be handing me in something that's got the wrong final answer. Or at least if it does, there should be a note attached saying, I know this is wrong because, but I can't work out where I've gone wrong. So it's more than just writing maths. Actually, they get both of these side by side kind of now. We do still do some maths in it all. The other thing that it kind of is reflected in is in the handouts and the lectures I do, where I realise I'd start thinking about how did I learn how to do this stuff, and it was largely by example. And all right, I had the nous to look at the example and realise that's what I should be doing, rather than just seeing that and then writing something completely different. And writing everything in your, if you give them model solutions or you give them handouts, writing everything properly in that is relatively easy. Though I did have to go through one or two things I'd written and go, actually, if I've just told them to write in sentences, then I'm not going to give them that anymore. It's actually much harder in lectures, depending on the way you lecture, because for a start in lectures, a lot of the words that we might put in if we were writing, we're saying. So we say the sentence and we write the equation down, and our students write everything you've put on the board and nothing that you've said in between. So, I mean, I was not as extreme as I said the words and only wrote the equation, but I've had to get a lot more fussy about how I write in lectures. That was a bit harder to get used to. But the other thing I do is, I don't know how you lecture, and we all have our own styles. As I write in a lecture, there's a commentary going on about how we've got, say, from this equation to that equation, what it is I've done. What I tried to get into the habit of doing was also doing the commentary on on the process, on what I was writing, from the trivial stuff of kind of saying, look, I am giving myself a capital letter and a full stop, or look, these equations, I'm aligning them with the equal sign, or look, I've not started this line with an equal sign because I can't. And so actually getting into that habit of doing a running commentary on what I was writing as well as why I was writing it, because I think they just don't, that you can write it perfectly, but if you don't point out what it is that's perfect about it, they don't necessarily see it. I tried to do the same in some of my handouts, which is actually rather harder, because if you try writing some good maths and at the same time providing a commentary on why that's good maths, that kind of gets in the way sometimes. It makes it trickier to make the maths good if you're trying to talk about two subjects at once. Here's the maths, here's why this is the way to write it. So that's a bit trickier, and it's a work in progress, I'd say. The other thing that I changed was in the coursework and the assessment. Now, this module, our first year modules tend to be 50-50 coursework and exam, and they used to be, most of them still are, kind of 2 to 4 big assignments over the course of a year. And I changed this in this one to a weekly assessment of some form. throughout the year. It's tiny. We have exercise classes that are kind of 20 to 25 students. I take 2 of them, so that's 50 scripts a week. So it's tiny. So it's relatively quick to mark, but the key thing about it was to give them really frequent, rapid feedback. I collected in 1 week, they get it back the next week, which is unusual in the rest of the course because they are getting these big meaty assignments in other modules which you really can't turn around in a week. And to speed that up, I gave up giving numbers on it because, you know, then I'm starting to agonise about, is this 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10? I went with this grading system that when A is practically perfect, B needs some work, C is just about a pass, D isn't good enough. I didn't even tell them this year how that translated into marks until the end of the year. That was another story. But I actually give them 2 letters, and I'm really explicit. The first letter is, this is for, do I think you've kind of got the basic idea of the method and you've got the right answer and, you know, what you might call doing the maths. I still say I'll come back to why I hate that one. And 1 letter that was for whatever this week's How to Be a Good Mathematician theme was. Well, actually, cumulative up to whatever this week's theme was. I did expect them to carry on what they'd learned in earlier weeks. So it was, you know, in the start of this course, it was quite common for them to get an A for doing the maths and a D for writing it well. And I give them equal weight. Now actually, because I've got coursework and a phase test and an exam, that means that the explicit, this is only about writing and behaving well bit works out at about 16%. Though obviously, I do also mark my exam with an eye to these things, so it's not that clear cut, but this section of it is about 16%. And I said extremely gradual development of the ideas. I really do mean extremely gradual development of the ideas. In week 1, I tell them very, very little about how to write maths well, except from saying that if it's illegible or untidy or messy, then you're going to lose marks. I want it to flow from top to bottom and left to right, and I need to be able to tell the difference between your 7s and your Zs and your 2s and your S's and your 5s and so on. And that at the end of your answer, I want a clear summary of what you've done. You know, that even if it's only as minor as the solution of this equation is this. And then I set them the weekly task that week is some transposition of some nasty looking equation full of S's and 5s and P's and rows and Z's and 7s. So on that one, they usually do quite well because they're thinking about it. And following week, we start talking a little bit about statements and talking about using the right name for, you know, not everything you write down is an equation, not everything you write down is a formula. So we're talking about the words that you use and explaining where you've got, how you've got from here to here. And then we get on to that basic one of how to use an equal sign. So that's the kind of level that I start at, but it does build up. What are the difficulties? Well, there was a bit of kind of redesign of my handouts, my materials, my way of presenting lectures that is ongoing really. Student resistance, I put a question mark to the next 3 really. Some students are resistant, some aren't. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes from them in a little while. To be honest, at the end of this year, I'd say there are still maybe 5 to 10 students out of a class of 90 who appear to be very resistant to this idea from the work they're still handing in. But by and large, they're not. Staff aren't particularly resistant, apart from my co-tutors who do the other tutorial groups, who find the idea of doing 25 sets of marking every week a bit of a pain. And some are a bit bigger than others, so there's a little bit, but they've kind of got used to that and they see the point. But the bigger one is the question of whether staff in other modules are undermining what you do. This phrase, you know, when people use doing the maths to mean doing the calculation, doing, you know, working out the number, working out the expression, whatever it is you're trying to do. And I actually think we should be telling our students that maths starts with whatever first question you want, through formulating that problem mathematically to working out some calculation or whatever it is, to looking at your result and interpreting it, to redoing something if you think there's something wrong, through to communicating it at the end of it. And all of that should be doing the maths. But I do find occasionally colleagues, they kind of are supportive in practice, and then you see their handouts and what they do, it breaks all the rules I would think of as writing good maths. So I think some of my students have come away with the idea that Mike's a pedant when it comes to writing maths, but the rest of them you can get away with what you like. So I don't know quite how you get around that. And I have to say that the feedback is quite time consuming, especially in the first few weeks when I give them a lot of feedback in the first few weeks about what they're doing wrong. It gets easier. I do think it pays dividends. I've just marked a big pile of second year module work, and some of them it's, well, Kevin used the phrase a joy to mark. Like you say, it's never quite a joy, is it? But you do really notice the one that you can just read it really easily and see that what they're doing is logical and sensible, and the ones that you're looking at and you're thinking, what the hell are you doing? I think it has various example advantages from the students, but one of the most important is about being really explicit that we value this. We value this in the time we give it to teaching. We don't just say, this is important, go away and learn it on your own. We say, this is important, we're going to take the time to teach you the things we think are important, and we're going to reflect that in the marks we give you, and so on. I also think, I do see some evidence, I think, though, again, one of Kevin's questions, have we got any credible evidence? I think I see students actually dealing with the underlying maths more successfully because they're writing and thinking more clearly. Now, have you noticed a huge pinch of salt I've put on the top bit of that? Because I don't think quantitative evidence about student performance is ever very convincing. But the pass rate went up substantially, even though the exam mean didn't particularly. Really substantially. I don't know whether I can claim that's down to this or just a different cohort, but it seems to me worries about, oh, you're wasting the time that you should be teaching them real maths on doing this stuff, are kind of undermined by those numbers at the top that says, actually, when it came to the exam where I set them a very similar exam to previous years, they actually did, more of them succeeded on it than previously. They didn't, on average, do that much better, which was a bit odd. And I see less nonsense, I think, and I think they're appreciating that those skills are important. Those are some quotes from our student logbooks. People have talked about, can you sell it to them? Do you get student resistance? I think it does depend how you sell it and how you kind of bill it to them. I did start by saying very clearly what I was trying to do, and they were saying, oh, isn't it great, we're thinking about things in a different way. The most negative one was this one at the bottom. It said it's really time consuming to, writing these sentences and doing all this, it's really time consuming. And the same student about a semester later said, all that stuff is just coming naturally now. I'm doing that automatically. And that works for me. And because one of the problems with this module was the difference, I mean, we needed a lot of revision for some of our students, and we had others who were disengaging, was that I was finding that even the ones who kind of knew a lot of the material could see that they were doing something different with it. So that was my kind of summary. I think the key one for me was being really explicit both to myself and to the students that this was something we valued, and then trying to follow that through and working it into absolutely everything that I tried to do. And that's hard to keep that up for all the time, especially, you know, you're trying to get through that chunk of maths and you've got an hour to do it. It's difficult sometimes to kind of keep at that, but I think it's important. I think my watch reckons I took 2 minutes too long. That's not bad for me. If you've got any questions or comments.
You have material accessible from the internet or something?
I could, for about another week, and then I'm taking it down. But I could send you stuff that I do if you want.
Is there anything you'd share for Kevin's DVD?
I'll have a look at what I've got.
Okay. I'm very interested in this idea of not just, I mean, this idea that students misuse mathematical symbols, and then you think about actually where did we teach them how to do that? And, you know, they sort of watch you do it in lectures and they're supposed to infer what's good about that and what isn't good about that. And to actually sit down and teach them this is why we do this symbol, like, this is what this symbol means, this is how we do it, I think is very important.
I was going to ask, what are your future plans to do with this?
Well, we have a new colleague joined us this year who has a real kind of strength in saying that she believes that what you need to get in students is to kind of have a set of attitudes and skills and a kind of toolkit of basic ideas that you, and rather than here's that type of exam question, tackle it that way. So I'm hoping she's going to do one of the tutoring on this for this year to see what I'm currently doing. Actually, what's my plan? I'm hoping she'll take it over the year after and do something a bit more kind of along her lines of thinking, because I like the way she thinks about it. I don't quite feel confident putting what she talks about into practice. So I'm kind of hoping that to either work with her or to hand it on, having shifted it slightly. But I think, like a lot of things, it's a work in progress. But in the next year, I'm probably not going to change that much on what I'm doing. Seems to have worked reasonably well the last couple of years.
So how many students have you got?
We've got about 90 on the first year.
Do they all hand in your weekly assignment?
Beg your pardon?
Do they all hand in their weekly assignment?
No, they don't all hand them in, but mostly they do. I give them a little bit of slack. I say we'll count the best 8 out of 10 in each semester, so they can cut a little bit of. It was partly I didn't want to get into endless arguments about whether they had extenuating circumstances. It was easier to go, oh, you were poorly, never mind, make it up on the next one. Unfortunately, what I do have to do at our university is completely ignore all the rules about how you're meant to hand in work and getting receipts and all that stuff. I bypass cheerfully. Can I turn the microphone off? Are we done? Shall I give it back to you, Kevin?